Catelyn. Of all the rooms in Winterfell's great keep, Catelyn's bedchambers were the hottest. She seldom had to light a fire. The castle had been built over hot springs, and the scalding waters rushed through its walls and chambers like blood through a man's body, driving the chill from the stone halls, filling the glass gardens with a moist warmth, keeping the earth from freezing. Open pools smoked day and night in a dozen small courtyards. There was a little thing in summer. In winter, it was the difference between life and death. Catelyn's bath was always hot and steaming, and her halls warm to the touch. The warmth reminded her of River Run, of days in the summer with Lisa and Edmure, but Ned could never abid the heat. The Starks were made for the cold, he would tell her, and she would laugh and tell him, in that case, they had certainly built their castle in the wrong place. So when they had finished, Ned rolled off and climbed from her bed, as he had 1,000 times before. He crossed the room, pulled back the heavy tapestries, and threw open the high, narrow windows one by one, letting the night air into the chamber. The wind swirled around him as he stood facing the dark, naked and empty-handed. Catelyn pulled the furs to her chin and watched him. He looked somehow smaller and more vulnerable, like the youth she had wed in the sept at River Run 15 long years ago. Her loins still ached from the urgency of his lovemaking. It was a good ache. She could feel his seed within her. She prayed that it might quicken there. It had been 3 years since Rickon. She was not too old. She could give him another. "I will refuse him," Ned said as he turned back to her. His eyes were haunted, his voice thick with doubt. Catelyn sat up in the bed. "You cannot. You must not. My duties are here in the north. I have no wish to be in Robert's hand." "He will not understand that. He is a king now, and kings are not like other men. If you refuse to serve him, he will wonder why, and sooner or later he will begin to suspect that you oppose him. Can't you see the danger that would put us in?" Ned shook his head, refusing to believe. "Robert will never harm me or any of mine. We were closer than brothers. He loves me. If I refuse him, he will roar and curse and bluster, and in a week we will laugh about it together. I know the man." "You knew the man," she said. "The king is a stranger to you." Catelyn remembered the dire wolf dead in the snow, the broken antler lodged deep in her throat. She had to make him see. "Pride is everything to a king, my lord. Robert came all this way to see you, to bring you these great honors. You cannot throw them back in his face." "Honors?" Ned laughed bitterly. "In his eyes, yes," she said. "And in yours?" "And in mine." She blazed, angry now. Why couldn't he see? He offers his own son in marriage to our daughter. What else would you call that? Sansa might someday be queen. Her sons could rule from the wall to the mountains of Dorne. What is so wrong with that? Gods, Catelyn, Sansa is only 11, Ned said. And Joffrey is... She finished for him. Crown, prince, and heir to the Iron Throne. And I was only 12 when my father promised me to your brother Brandon. That brought a bitter twist to Ned's mouth. Brandon. Yes, Brandon. He would know what to do. He always did. It was all meant for Brandon. You, Winterfell, everything. He was born to be a king's hand and father to queens. I never asked for this cup to pass to me. Perhaps not, Catelyn said, but Brandon is dead, and the cup has passed, and you must drink from it, like it or not. Ned turned away from her, back to the night. He stared out in the darkness, watching the moon and the stars, perhaps, or perhaps the sentries on the wall. Catelyn softened then to see his pain. Eddard Stark had married her in Brandon's place, as custom decreed, but the shadow of his dead brother still lay between them, as did the other, the shadow of the woman he would not name, the woman who had borne him his bastard son. She was about to go to him when the knock came at the door, loud and unexpected. Ned turned, frowning. What is it? Desmond's voice came through the door. My lord, Maester Luwin is without the... Oh, okay. Let me try that again. My lord, Maester Luwin is without and begs urgent aid. Why can't I read right now? My brain just went south. And if you guys hear my furball, then he's there. My lord, Maester Luwin is without and begs urgent audience. You told him I had left orders not to be disturbed? Yes, my lord. He insists? Very well. Ned crossed to the wardrobe and slipped on a heavy robe. Catelyn realized suddenly how cold it had become. She sat up in bed and pulled the furs to her chin. Perhaps we should close the windows, she suggested. Ned nodded absently. Maester Luwin was shown in. The Maester was a small gray man. His eyes were gray and quick and saw much. His hair was gray, what little the years had left him. His robe was gray wool, trimmed with white fur, the Stark colors. Its gray, floppy sleeves had pockets hidden inside. Luwin was always tucking things into those sleeves and producing other things from them, books, messages, strange artifacts, toys for the children. With all he kept hidden in his sleeves, Catelyn was surprised that 𝘕𝘗𝘠𝘠𝘕 could lift his arms at all. The Maester waited until the door had been closed behind him before he spoke. "My lord," he said to Ned, "pardon for disturbing your rest. I have been left a message." Ned looked irritated. "Been left? By whom? Has there been a rider? I was not told." "There was no rider, my lord. Only a carved wooden box left on a table in my observatory while I napped. My servants saw no one, but it must have been brought by someone in the king's party. We had no visitors from the south." "A wooden box, you say?" "Inside was a fine new lens for the observatory, from 𝘕𝘗 by the look of it. The lens crafters of 𝘕𝘗 are without equal." Ned frowned. He had little patience for this sort of thing, Catelyn knew. "A lens," he said. "What has that to do with me?" "I asked the same question," 𝘕𝘗𝘠𝘠𝘕 said. "Clearly this was more to this than the seeming." Under the heavy weight of furs, Catelyn shivered. "A lens is an instrument to help us see." "Indeed it is." He fingered the collar of his order. A heavy chain wore tight around the neck beneath his robe, each link forged from a different metal. Catelyn could feel dread stirring inside her once again. "What is it that they would have us see more clearly?" "The very thing I asked myself." 𝘕𝘗𝘠𝘠𝘠𝘕 drew a tightly rolled paper out of his sleeve. "I found the true message concealed within a false bottom when I dismantled the box, and the lens had come in, but it is not for my eyes." Ned held out his hand. "Let me have it, then." Lewin did not stir. "Pardons, my lord. The message is not for you either. It is marked for the eyes of Lady Catelyn, and her alone. May I approach?" Catelyn nodded, not trusting to speak. The Maester placed the paper on the table beside the bed. It was sealed with a small blob of blue wax. Lewin bowed and began to retreat. "Stay," Ned commanded. His voice was grave. He looked at Catelyn. "What is it? My lady, you are shaking." "I'm afraid," she admitted. She reached out and took the letter in trembling hands. The furs dropped away from her nakedness, forgotten. In the blue wax was the moon and falcon seal of House Arryn. "It's from Lisa." Catelyn looked at her husband. "It will not make us glad," she told him. "There is a grief in this message, Ned. I can feel it." Ned frowned. His face darkened. "Open it." Catelyn broke the seal. Her eyes moved over the words. At first, they made no sense to her. Then she remembered. "Lisa took no chances. When we were girls together, we had a private language, she and I."
Can you read it?
Yes, Catelyn admitted.
Then tell us. Perhaps I should withdraw,
𝘕𝘲𝘠𝘠 said. No, Catelyn said. We will need your counsel. She threw back the furs and climbed from the bed. The night air was as cold as the grave on her bare skin as she padded across the room. Maester Luwin averted his eyes. Even Ned looked shocked.
What are you doing?
Lighting fire, Catelyn told him. She found a dressing gown and shrugged into it, then knelt over the cold hearth.
Maester Luwin,
Ned began. Maester Luwin has delivered all my children, Catelyn said. There is no time for false modesty. She slid the paper in among the kindling and placed the heavier logs on top of it. Ned crossed the room, took her by the arm, and pulled her to her feet. He held her there, his face inches from her.
My lady, tell me, what was in this message?
Catelyn stiffened in her grasp. A warning, she said softly. If we have the wits to hear. His eyes searched her face.
Go on.
Lisa says 𝘕𝘩𝘳𝘠𝘠 was murdered. His fingers tightened on her arm.
By whom?
The Lannisters, she told him. The Queen. Ned released his hold on her arm. There were deep red marks on her skin. Gods, he whispered. His voice was hoarse.
Your sister is sick with grief. She cannot know what she's saying.
She knows, Catelyn said. Lisa is impulsive, yes, but this message was carefully planned, carefully hidden. She knew it meant death if her letter fell into the wrong hands. Too much so risk. She must have had more than mere superstition. Catelyn looked to her husband. Now we truly have no choice. You must be Robert's hand. You must go south with him and learn the truth. She saw at once that Ned had reached a very difficult conclusion.
The only truths I know are here. The south is a nest of aiders I would do better to avoid.
Luwin plucked at his chain collar where it had chafed the soft skin of his throat. The hand of the king has great power, my lord. Power to find the truth of Lord Aeron's death, to bring his killers to the king's justice. Power to protect Lady Aeron and her son, if the worst be true. Ned glanced helplessly around the bedchamber. Catelyn's heart went out to him, but she knew she could not take him in her arms just then. First, the victory must be won for her children's sake. You say you love Robert like a brother? Would you leave your brother surrounded by Lannisters?
The others take both of you.
Ned muttered darkly. He turned away from them and went to the window. She did not speak, nor did the Maester. They waited, quiet, while Eddard Stark said a silent farewell to the home he loved. When he turned away from the window at last, his voice was tired and full of melancholy. A moisture glistened faintly at the corners of his eyes.
My father went south once to answer the summons of a king. He never came home.
A different time, Maester Luwin said. A different king.
Yes,
Ned said dully. He seated himself in a chair by the hearth.
Catelyn, you shall stay here in Winterfell.
His words were like an icy draft through his heart. No, she said, suddenly afraid. Was this to be her punishment? Never to see his face again, nor to feel his arms around her?
Yes,
Ned said, in words that would broke no argument.
You must govern the north in my stead while I run Robert's errands. There must be always a Stark in Winterfell. Robb is 14. Soon enough he will be a man grown. He must learn to rule, and I will not be here for him. Make him part of your councils. He must be ready when his time comes. God's will, not for many years,
Maester Luwin muttered.
Maester Luwin, I trust you as I would my own blood. Give my wife your voice in all things great and small. Teach my son the things he knows and what he needs to know. Winter is coming.
Maester Luwin nodded gravely. Then silence fell until Catelyn found her courage and asked the question whose answer she most dreaded.
What of your other children?
Ned stood, took her in his arms, and held her face close to his.
Rickon is very young, he said gently. He should stay here with you and Robb. The others I would take with me.
I could not bear it, Catelyn said, trembling.
You must,
he said.
Sansa must wed Joffrey. That is clear now. We must give them no grounds to suspect our devotion. It is past time that Ira learned the ways of a southern court. In a few years, she will be of an age to marry too.
Sansa would shine in the south, Catelyn thought to herself, and the gods knew that Ira needed refinement. Reluctantly, she let go of them in her heart,
but not Bronn. Never Bronn.
Yes, she said, but please, Ned, for all the love you bear me, let Bronn remain here at Winterfell. He is only 7.
I was 8 when my father sent me to foster at the Eyrie,
Ned said.
Sir Roderick tells me there is a bad feeling between Robb and Prince Joffrey. This is not healthy. Bronn can bridge that distance. He is a sweet boy, quick to laugh, easy to love. Let him grow up with the young princess. Let him become their friend as Robert became mine. Our house will be safer for it.
He was right. Catelyn knew it. It did not make the pain any easier to bear. She would lose all 4 of them. Then, Ned and both girls and her sweet, loving Bronn. Only Robb and little Rickon would be left to her. She felt lonely already.
keep him off the walls then? She said bravely. You know how Bronn loves to climb. Ned kisses the tears from her eyes before they could fall. Thank you, my lady, he whispered. This is hard, I know. What of Jon Snow, my lord? Maester Luwin asked. Catelyn tensed at the mention of the name. Ned felt the anger in her and pulled away. Many men fathered bastards. Catelyn had grown up with that knowledge. It came as no surprise to her in the first year of her marriage to learn that Ned had fathered a child on some girl chance met on campaign. He had a man's needs after all, and they had spent that year apart, Ned off at war in the south while she remained safe in her father's castle at River Run. Her thoughts were more of Robb, the infant at her breast, than of the husband she scarcely knew. He was welcome to whatever solace he might find between battles, and if his seed quickened, she expected he would see to the child's needs. He did more than that. The Starks were not like other men. Ned brought his bastard home with him and called him son for all the North to see. When the wars were over at last, and Catelyn rode to Winterfell, Jon and his wet nurse had already taken up residence. That cut deep. Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word, but a castle has no secrets, and Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of the husband's soldiers. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dayon, the sword of the morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of Aerys' Kingsguard, and of how their young lord had slain him in single combat. And they told how afterward Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. The lady Ashera Dane, tall and fair, with haunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband the truth of it, asked him to his face. That was the only time in all the years that Ned had ever frightened her. Never ask me about Jon, he said, cold as ice. He is my blood, and that is all you need to know. And now, I will learn where you heard that name, my lady. She had pledged to obey. She told him, and that day on, the whispering had stopped, and Ashera Dane's name was never heard in Winterfell again. Whoever Jon's mother had been, Ned must have loved her fiercely, for nothing Catelyn said would persuade him to send the boy away. It was the one thing she could never forgive him. She had come to love her husband with all her heart, but she had never found it in her to love Jon. She might have overlooked a dozen bastards for Ned's sake, so long as they were out of sight. Jon was never out of sight, and as he grew, he looked more like Ned than any of the true-born sons she bore. Somehow, that made it worse. John must go, she said now. He and Rob are close, Ned said. I had hoped. He cannot stay here, Catelyn said, cutting him off. He is your son, not mine. I will not have him here. It was hard, she knew, but no less the truth. Ned would do the boy no kindness by leaving him here at Winterfell. The look Ned gave her was anguished. You know I cannot take him to the south. There will be no place for him at the court. A boy with a bastard name. You know what they will say of him. He will be shunned. Catelyn armored her heart against the mute appeal in her husband's eyes. They say your friend Robert has fathered a dozen bastards himself, and none of them has ever been seen at court. Ned blazed. The Lannister women has seen to that. How can you be so damned cruel, Catelyn? He is only a boy. His fury was on him. He might have said more and worse, but Maester Luwin cut in. Another solution presents itself, he said, his voice quiet. Your brother Benjamin came to me about John a few days ago. It seems the boy aspires to take the black. Ned looked shocked. He asked to join the Night's Watch? Catelyn said nothing. Let Ned work it out in his own mind. Her voice would not be welcome now. Yet gladly would she have kissed the Maester just then. His was the perfect solution. Benjen Stark was a sworn brother. John would be a son to him. The child he would never have. And in time, the boy would take the oath as well. He would father no sons, who might someday contest with Catelyn's own grandchildren for Winterfell. Maester Luwin said, It is a great honor and service on the wall, my lord. And even a bastard may rise high in Night's Watch. Ned reflected. Still, his voice was troubled. John is so young. Hopefully you guys didn't hear my dog, but that's most likely, but meh. John is very young. If he asked this when he was a grown man, that would be one thing. But a boy of 14? A hard sacrifice, Maester Luwin agreed. Yet these are hard times, my lord. His road is no crueler than yours.
Catelyn thought of the 3 children she might lose. It was not easy keeping silent then. Ned turned away from them to gaze out the window, his long face silent and thoughtful. Finally, he sighed and turned back. Very well, he said to Maester Luwin. I suppose it is for the best. I will speak to Ben. When shall we tell John? The Maester asked. When I must. Preparations must be made. It will be a fortnight before we are ready to depart. I would sooner let John enjoy these last few days.
Summer will end soon enough, and childhood as well, when the time comes.